What's going on, everyone? So I was at the doctor's office yesterday morning for a routine checkup, just sitting in the waiting room, flipping through old magazines and trying to avoid eye contact with the other patients who all looked miserable. They had ESPN playing on the TV mounted in the corner, and normally I'd just zone out and scroll through my phone, but then First Take came on, and I saw Stephen A. Smith, Shannon Sharpe, and the rest of the panel looking absolutely fired up about something related to the 49er. The graphic on screen said something about San Francisco signing 3 players right before the Seahawks divisional round game, and I immediately put down the magazine and started paying attention, because any roster moves this late in the playoffs are significant. What I heard over the next 20 minutes or so was honestly one of the most comprehensive breakdowns of the 49ers' current roster situation, coaching excellence, and championship aspiration that I'd seen from any national show all postseason. Stephen A. was going off about how Kyle Shanahan is now the second longest tenured head coach in the NFL after Mike Tomlin stepped down. Shannon was breaking down the Trent Williams impact numbers and why he's the true MVP of that offense. And then they got into detailed analysis of these 3 signings: Derek Forrest at safety, Hayden Rucci at tight end, and Colton Dow at wide receiver, while also discussing Robert Saleh's upcoming head coaching interviews and the possibility of Fred Warner returning if San Francisco beats Seattle. The way they connected all these storylines together, the roster additions, the coaching stability, the injury updates, the historical context of how much this team has changed since Week 1, was genuinely excellent television that had everyone in that waiting room completely locked in. By the time the nurse called my name, I almost asked if I could wait a few more minutes to finish watching because the analysis was that good. Let me walk you through everything that went down on First Take, because the depth and passion they brought to discussing this 49ers team heading into their biggest game of the season was honestly some of the best NFL playoff coverage I've seen all year. Hey, what's up, everyone? Before we dive in, I need 1 second of your time. That like button right there? Hitting it now makes a massive difference in reaching more fans with this content. I know you're ready for the breakdown, but real quick, just smash that like button. It's the single most powerful way to support this channel and help the algorithm push this to thousands more people. Every like matters, so do me that favor right now. So, First Take opened the segment with Stephen A. saying this is an absolutely loaded show coming your way on today's program about the San Francisco 49ers. The Niners just signed 3 players in the lead-up to the Seahawks game on Saturday night, and there's some mind-blowing roster intel for San Francisco that people need to understand. How Mike Tomlin stepping down as Steelers head coach impacts Kyle Shanahan's legacy, and standing in the league, the Trent Williams impact, and why he's the most valuable player on that offense, and some Robert Saleh and Fred Warner updates that could change everything about how we view this team's Super Bowl chances. But Stephen A. wanted to begin by asking the audience a question. Do you want to see special F Seattle shirts made for 49ers fans heading into this massive divisional round rivalry game? He explained that they've been collaborating with designers to put together some concepts, and they made the Dub City shirt in honor of Fred Warner, where anytime the Niners get that W, it's Dub City. They've sold a bunch of these all across the world to 49ers fans who want to rep their team. So if people want something similar going into this Seahawks game for Seahawks Week, and it doesn't just play for this one game, since this is a great rivalry, where the Niners and Seahawks play at least twice every single year, they should show their support. Shannon Sharpe jumped in saying the rivalry aspect is what makes this so special, and fans should absolutely embrace it, because playoff football between these 2 teams has given us some of the most memorable moments in recent NFC history. The trash talk, the physicality, the back and forth, that's what playoff football is all about. Then they got into the actual roster moves, and Stephen A. said as far as those 3 signings for San Francisco, John Lynch has been busy working the phone and making moves. The Niners signed safety Derek Forrest, signed tight end Hayden Rucci and also signed wide receiver Colton Dow. "Let's talk about all these players and what they bring to the table," Stephen A. said, because as far as Forrest and these practice squad moves, he would imagine one or maybe two of these players could get elevated from the practice squad to the game day active roster for Saturday night. For the wide receiver in Dow, it's a futures contract, so he's not on the practice squad, but Forrest is very interesting. He's 26 years old, 6'0", and 206 pounds, which is pretty good size at that safety position. He ran a 4.42 40-yard dash coming out of Cincinnati, which means he can really move and cover ground quickly. And he's a pretty experienced player who was drafted by the Washington Commanders in the 5th round back in 2021. He's played in 40 games with 17 starts, and he played in a loaded Cincinnati secondary for head coach Luke Fickell at the time. Shannon noted that he was in that secondary with the likes of Sauce Gardner, who's turned into one of the top cornerbacks in the entire game, and Kobe Bryant, who's a safety for the Seattle Seahawks. So that Cincinnati defense was absolutely stacked with NFL talent. That Bearcats team was awesome during that run under Fickell, and a big reason for that success was the play of Derek Forrest as well in that defensive backfield. Speaking of the athleticism, Stephen A. said the relative athletic score in the pre-draft process was 9.16 on a scale of 0 to 10, which is absolutely elite across the board. You see all the green in those athletic testing categories: 39-inch vertical leap, 11-foot broad jump, and that 4.42 40-yard dash. He's being added to the roster because the status of Dre Greenlaw is unknown going into Saturday night's matchup against the Seahawks. Greenlaw injured his hamstring against the Eagles in that wild card upset victory, which is why Malik Mustafa, the 5th-round rookie pick out of Kansas State, who hadn't played much on defense lately, stepped in and played absolutely awesome filling in. So we'll see what happens with Greenlaw's availability. But the Niners had to make this move because they're a little bit thin at that safety position with all the injuries they've dealt with this season. Then there's Hayden Rucci, who's a 2024 undrafted free agent out of Wisconsin. And Shannon said this is a classic Wisconsin player, especially at tight end. Doesn't move all that quickly with a 4.94 40-yard dash, but he's got good size at 6'5", and 247 pounds. He can run you over and rumble down the field after the catch. When you watch him play, you immediately think that is a classic Big Ten type of tight end who's physical and tough. He's had 2 stints with the Miami Dolphins, and Stephen A. thinks that's at play here for the 49ers because of the scheme familiarity that Rucci would have from playing under Mike McDaniel in Miami. You add him to this roster, and he could pick up Kyle Shanahan's scheme very quickly, since Shanahan and McDaniel coached together for years and run very similar offensive systems. The Niners did make a roster move because George Kittle tore his Achilles in that Eagles game and will get surgery tomorrow on Thursday. As they were recording this, it was Wednesday, January 14th. So at the tight end position, the Niners have elevated Braden Willis from the practice squad to the active roster. In his career, he's played 23 games, mostly on special teams, with only 3 offensive targets total. So he's not going to replace Kittle's production, obviously. And then the wide receiver Colton Dow has been signed to the team on a reserve and future contract, not to the active roster or practice squad. He's played in 10 games over 3 years after playing college football at UT Martin, and he's spent a lot of time on the Baltimore Ravens practice squad. Another good athlete who the Niners are bringing into the system here, a relative athletic score of 9.78 coming out of college, which is absolutely elite. He's nearly 6'3" and 212 pounds, so he has some really good size for the position. And Stephen A. said he doesn't really care about bench press numbers for wide receivers because you're not really using that chest motion when you're running routes and catching passes, but 21 reps at 225 pounds shows this guy is strong and physical. He's an athletic freak with a 41.5-inch vertical, more than an 11-foot broad jump, and at nearly 6'3" and 212 pounds, he clocked a 4. 42 40-yard dash in the pre-draft process. So both Forrest and Dow at safety and wide receiver can absolutely fly and cover ground, which is critical in today's NFL, where speed kills on both sides of the ball. Then they transitioned to something Shannon called absolutely mind-blowing when you think about the 49ers, when they went on the road in Week 1 to play the Seahawks, compared to now when they're back in Seattle for the divisional round. The Niners could have 11 different starters on both sides of the ball from the last time they were in Seattle in Week 1, which is just an insane amount of roster turnover and speaks to the injuries and changes this team has dealt with all season long. The 49ers starters in Week 1 on offense had Trent Williams at left tackle, Ben Bartch at left guard, Jake Brendel at center, Dominic Pooney at right guard, and Colton McKivitz at right tackle. The change there includes Ben Bartch, who's been replaced. And then the skill position players, you had Brock Purdy at quarterback, George Kittle at tight end, Christian McCaffrey in the backfield, Kyle Juszczyk at fullback, Ricky Pearsall, and Jawan Jennings at the wide receiver spots. What's pretty crazy about this, Stephen A. said, is that Marquez Valdez-Scantling and Russell Gage played 27 and 28 snaps, respectively, in that football game back in Week 1, and they're no longer on the roster at all. Meanwhile, Kendrick Bourne and Malek Turner were not on the roster then, but are on the roster now, and they were both on the field for that Brock Purdy surgical game-winning drive against the Eagles on Sunday in the wild card round. Ben Bartch got hurt again, which is one of the changes at left guard, and George Kittle obviously won't play in this game after tearing his Achilles last week. It's going to be Jake Tongs getting the start at tight end. The 49ers starters in Week 1 on defense is where there are going to be a lot of changes, Shannon emphasized. The defensive linemen were Nick Bosa, Kalia Davis, Jordan Elliott, and Maliek Collins. Literally, you could see changes at every single defensive line spot. The rookies have kind of supplanted Davis and Elliott in the rotation. And then, of course, the injuries to Collins and Nick Bosa have forced major adjustments. At linebacker, Fred Warner and Devondre Campbell both might not play in this game. Definitely not for Fred Warner, at least, though he could surprise everyone. And Campbell might miss time again with his own injury issues. In the secondary, you had Renardo Green, Diamador Lenoir, and Ambry Thomas starting. And then, at safety, Jair Brown and Malik Mustafa. Now, Greenlaw is out, and Mustafa could get the start once again against Seattle. The defensive line obviously looks a lot different, as Stephen A. alluded to. No Nick Bosa, no Collins. It really hurts you from a pass-rushing standpoint, and those are two of your best players. And then the Niners have really missed Collins as a run defender, and it's one of those absences where you see a player's true value. The 49ers drafted Collins because they loved how he set the edge in the run game. They wanted to fix that aspect of their defense. Without him, the run defense has gotten noticeably worse, so you've seen his value in his absence. And then how about the play of both Malik Collins, the second-round pick out of Texas, and Evan Anderson, the fourth-round pick out of Indiana? They played just 16 snaps, combined in Week 1 on the road against Seattle. But now they are focal points of this 49ers defensive line. And those two rookies played absolutely awesome against the Philadelphia Eagles on Sunday in that upset victory. Maliek Collins is also a mainstay now along the defensive line after playing only 15 snaps in Week 1. So a lot of changes for sure, potentially against the Seahawks, from Week 1 until now for both 49ers trips to the Pacific Northwest this season. Shannon said still to come on the show, they're going to discuss how Mike Tomlin stepping down impacts Kyle Shanahan's legacy, the Trent Williams impact with actual statistical breakdown, and some updates on Robert Saleh's upcoming head coaching interviews, and Fred Warner's recovery timeline. After a quick Harry's Razors sponsorship, which Stephen A. delivered, talking about how your phone is basically a supercomputer and your car can park itself, but your razor is still stuck in 2008. They came back to discuss Mike Tomlin stepping down after 19 seasons as Pittsburgh Steelers head coach. He never had a record below 500, which is incredible, but also hadn't won a playoff game since 2016. which shows the decline. And so, with Tomlin stepping down, these are now the longest-tenured head coaches across the National Football League. Andy Reid was hired in 2013 by the Chiefs coming from Philadelphia. Sean McDermott, Sean McVay, and Kyle Shanahan were all hired in 2017. So, already Kyle Shanahan is tied for being the second longest-tenured head coach in the entire National Football League, which is remarkable when you think about it. How quickly time goes by, Shannon said. Shanahan took over an absolutely awful situation in 2017 after some disastrous years from Jim Tomsula and Chip Kelly. He rebuilt this organization very quickly from the ground up. He's led the 49ers to 2 Super Bowl appearances and 4 NFC championship games in just 9 years, maybe another NFC title game appearance if the Niners can beat the Seahawks on Saturday night. He's put together a playoff record of 9-4, which is excellent, so Stephen A. knows that the biggest game has evaded him, that Super Bowl championship ring. But Shanahan has won a lot of marquee playoff games and proven he can coach at the highest level. And with Shanahan, he's so elite as one of the top offensive minds in the game, one of the best play callers, one of the best play designers and schemers. He maximizes players, especially at the quarterback position. And because of that, he gives you a chance to win every single week, especially from an X's and O's standpoint. He's built a great winning culture for San Francisco. And on Sunday against the Eagles, what we saw was a coaching masterclass. The 49ers are really lucky to have Kyle Shanahan as their head coach. And now with Tomlin gone, he moves up that seniority list, which just adds to his legacy and standing in the league. Then they got into the Trent Williams impact numbers, and Shannon said, let's talk about why Trent Williams is so important here. There's a reason why Trent Williams is a future Hall of Famer, and there's a reason they talked so much about his importance last week. Trent Williams continues to be the MVP of the San Francisco 49ers offense. Some people might say Brock Purdy or Christian McCaffrey, but the numbers don't lie. Since 2020, the Niners are 62-31 with Trent Williams playing. That is a winning percentage of nearly 67%, which is championship-level football. Without Trent Williams, that winning percentage dips all the way down to sub-24%, and the Niners are just 4-13 in those games. That's an absolutely staggering difference that proves his value beyond any doubt. He came back against that Eagles' vaunted defensive line and elite defense, and this 49ers offensive line played really well in that upset victory. And that's the Trent Williams impact right there, Stephen A. said, because he makes everybody around him better with his technique, his communication, his leadership, his physicality. And how about these numbers that were dug up comparing Week 1 against Seattle to Week 18? The Niners ran behind Trent Williams in Week 1, 7 carries for 43 yards, which is 6.1 yards per carry. In the rematch against the Seahawks in Week 18, when the Niners ran behind Austin Pleasance instead, San Francisco ran it 5 times for just 14 yards and an average of 8 yards per carry. The Niners did not have Trent Williams in Week 18, but they do have him now in the divisional round, and he could be a massive reason why the 49ers pull off another upset on the road. As far as Robert Saleh, Shannon said he is an absolute hot commodity right now, and the interest in him from other teams across the NFL will only increase and pick up after the defensive masterclass that he put on display against the Philadelphia Eagles offense. Yes, that's an Eagles offense that had a bad offensive coordinator in Kevin Patullo who didn't know how to scheme, but Robert Saleh was down Nick Bosa, down Maliek Collins, had no Fred Warner, and was down to his 5th, 6th, and 7th linebackers on the depth chart. And from a schematic standpoint and a play-calling point of view, he shut that Eagles offense completely down by making brilliant in-game adjustments. His defense was playing lights out in the second half, and that's what great coaching can do when you have a brilliant defensive mind. And that's why Stephen A. wanted the 49ers to bring back Saleh to replace DeMeco Ryans as defensive coordinator this season. And what an incredible move it's ended up being for San Francisco. And because of what he's done this year in coaching up this defense despite all the injuries, Saleh has 5 interviews set up for head coaching opening. Baltimore Ravens, Tennessee Titans, Arizona Cardinals, Miami Dolphins, and the Atlanta Falcons. All those teams showing serious interest in Saleh potentially becoming their next head coach. But what Shannon loves about this is that Saleh is not doing any of these interviews until Sunday, after the 49ers play the Seahawks on Saturday night. So all of his focus and energy is on this Seahawks game in the divisional round, rather than thinking about his next job opportunity. That's the kind of professional and team-first mentality you want from your coaches. As far as what Saleh said about Fred Warner, he called Fred pure energy, after Warner was a limited participant yesterday, taking part in the 49ers walkthrough practice. Fred's the ultimate energy giver, so just having him out there is awesome. Yesterday was a little more tempo down, but today with higher tempo, it will be fun to get him out there and see him running around. In case you missed the news yesterday, Stephen A. said, "This is absolutely wild and could be a game changer." The 49ers have opened up the 21-day practice window for All-Pro linebacker Fred Warner, and the hope is that if the 49ers were to beat the Seahawks on Saturday night, Fred Warner could potentially return for the NFC Championship game next week. He got injured about 3 months ago, breaking and dislocating his ankle in a gruesome injury that looked season-ending. And now he could return this season and actually play in the playoffs, which seemed completely impossible when it first happened. It could be a reality if the Niners win this game, and having Fred Warner back for a potential NFC Championship game would be absolutely massive for their Super Bowl chances. What really struck me watching this entire First Take segment was how they managed to weave together all these different storylines. The 3 roster signings, the Week 1 to now comparison, the Tomlin retirement impact, the Trent Williams statistical dominance, the Saleh interview situation, the Warner recovery timeline, into one cohesive narrative about a 49ers team that's been through absolute hell with injuries, but keeps finding ways to win. Stephen A. and Shannon were both so passionate about giving this team credit for what they've accomplished, and they didn't shy away from the numbers that prove Trent Williams is genuinely the most valuable player on that offense, regardless of who's playing quarterback or running back. The 67% winning percentage with him versus 24% without him is just devastating proof of his impact. So what do you guys think? Can the 49ers actually pull off another road playoff upset against Seattle on Saturday night with all these roster changes and injuries? Or is this finally where the magic runs out? And if they do win, would getting Fred Warner back for the NFC Championship game make them the favorites to reach the Super Bowl? Let me know in the comments, because after watching First Take break down every single angle of this matchup with that level of detail and passion, I'm genuinely starting to believe this banged-up 49ers team might have enough left to make one more run at a championship.